Our guest has 36 years of experience teaching meditative and martial arts. Today, he's here to share how to improve your health, breathing, and inner power. Please welcome Jeff Patterson. Jeff, good evening to you.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Which part of the world are you in?
I'm in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast, US.
Portland, Oregon, West Coast. So it must be pretty cold there.
It's a little chilly here. Uh,
We're celebrating getting down to 9 degrees here in Taiwan, which for us is relatively cold because our dew point is really high. So I feel that 9 degrees here is more like -5 when we visit North Korea, where the climate's really dry. Sorry, not North, South Korea. So
mm,
for us, we get excited because most of the year on the island, in the office, it never gets below 30 degrees. So when we get a taste for those cold weather patterns, it's nice for the mind and body. It's nice to get out and go for a stroll in the sun, but also to have that crisp breeze on the back.
yeah, it wakes you up.
It does. It does. I just had to wake up walking the kids to school, get out there and the wind hits my face. Oh, it's good for the wrinkles. It's good for the wrinkles. Now, you've been teaching meditative and martial arts for 36 years. How did you get into the field?
In a bit of a roundabout way, in that when I was a young guy, I was very much into Western boxing. And I used to go to this boxing gym that was just a few blocks down the street here from my academy in Portland. And one of the boxing coaches there was somebody that I really wanted to get to train with. However, he had a full stable of athletes he was working with and wasn't looking to take on any new fighters. And so I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there, and I'd work hard and try to get him to notice me and see if he'd put some time into me. And after following him around for about 3 or 4 months, he finally started giving me some tips and helping me out and working with me a little bit. And it was only maybe 2 or 3 weeks of getting to work with him when he said something to me that changed my life in many ways. In that he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. Now, at the time, I was this 19-year-old kid who didn't know much of anything, thinking, isn't that for like old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And I started doing the practice, and not only did it help me in the ring, but it started changing my life in many different ways. And through the years, I've been very fortunate to see over 26,000 students come through my academy, thousands more online. And I've heard hundreds of stories of how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives. And that's what's made me so passionate about, trying to get the message out there.
Mm. Well, I think trying to convince any teenager that meditation is a positive, I think, is a tough battle. I think for a lot of times you got to discover it yourself, and I know that from being an athlete myself was even the thought of having to stretch and warm up. People could have told me all day, every day, then you've got to stretch, you've got to warm up, or you'll have an injury. But as a 15, 16, 17-year-old athlete, it falls on deaf ears. And it's not until you have an accident that you realize that they probably were right. I probably should have stretched. And I say probably because I ruptured a posterior cruciate ligament when I was 17 and I hadn't stretched. And then I went to rehabilitation and did weights, but I didn't stretch. And then by 18, I tore the cartilage in the same knee again. And most of the problem was flexibility. But trying to convince me of that at that age went in one ear and out the other. And I think the reason why that is that it's like in selling. People don't buy features, they buy the benefits. And I think if we can educate people at the level of benefit, I think they start to listen. So for you as a fighter, going back 26, 36 or 26, 36 years,
36, yeah.
36 years, What were the benefits that you received from meditation?
You know, so many. Some of the more prevalent ones that uh, immediately affected me were the ability to be more connected in my body, to be more present, to make that uh, training time less distraction free. So, anytime I'd get in the ring, it was a lot easier to focus. I felt like my movements came together more smoothly. I was able to use the whole body as more of one unit as to broken pieces, which you see like a lot of people when they'll throw a punch. You'll notice that their arm moves different than their weight transfer, and their weight transfer is different than turning the waist. But by having in tune movement meditative practice, it helps those things come together a lot smoother. And you'll see this in experienced fighters, whether they've done the meditative arts or not. But what happens is they'll get there from hundreds of thousands of repetitions over and over again. Whereas if you start learning how to expand this awareness from the beginning, you start to see that at, I think, a quicker pace, because you're slowing things down to the point where you notice all the little subtleties and details. And I'll never forget, I was at this party when I was like 21 years old, and one of the fighters at the gym had been fighting since he was, or boxing since he was like 6 years old. He was an amazing fighter, and really, really good, lot of talent. And I remember seeing him at this party, and he was kind of doing this footwork pattern across the floor as he was walking into the kitchen. And he would sit down and he would stand up real slow and he would move into his next foot. And he had never done Tai Chi or meditation before, but he was doing Tai Chi. And I'm like, there it is. That's what he meant. He's showing me how he was breaking that down. And I started making those connections. And when I saw that, a lot started changing for me. And I feel like in that first year of doing that, my skill level changed more than it ever had in the previous 4 or 5 years I'd been training.
Mm. To me, it sounds like that flow state that people talk about, and they talk about it conceptually, but they never know the steps on how to get into it. And as wakeboarders, we would sometimes have a set where you felt like you were in flow. And with the wakeboarding, you could be going down the river and you could tell the speed of the boat by the sound. You could tell the speed of the boat by the size and the shape of the wake. You could tell how good the water was 100 or 150 meters down just with a quick glimpse of the eye. But it seemed like everything was taking place at once. There wasn't there was no compartmentalization of wake, boat, rope. There was nothing that was separate. It was like everything was one. And when you got into that flow state, you always had the best ride. The crew could be pumping the stereo in the boat, but it wasn't in your conscious awareness. There could be somebody in a chase boat with a camera on you or a helicopter above filming, and you wouldn't even realize it because you're just in that moment. And you'd have these sets where everything would just come together. You started at the appropriate place to cut into the wake. You rode through the trough. You hit the wake at the right angle. The board was at the right angle. The rope position was there. And then when you did the trick, it was almost like you were already one step ahead of what was going to happen. You'd do the trick in the slow motion. You'd land and transition and right away. And then perfectly transition back into the next trick. And as long as you felt and you knew that you're in that state, you could stay in it, but you couldn't be too conscious of it. As soon as if you got surprised, oh, I'm in the flow state, it'd almost disappear. And so we would see that in training, but some people could actually replicate it in competition. And the guys in competition who could replicate that state would always have the winning trick pass. And it was just this aura. It was this little bit of magic that they seemed to have, that they were just doing something different. We might not have called it meditation, but there was a form of altered consciousness for sure. So with Tai Chi, when do most people start to learn?
Start to learn.
Hmm. So if people want to start to learn Tai Chi, when do you see them wanting to learn? Are they wanting to learn in their 20s or 30s? Because here
Oh,
in Taiwan, Tai Chi is a very common practice. But traditionally, you would see old people in the park
yeah.
doing Tai Chi. So from an outsider, you might think, oh, people do it in retirement. But it's very common here. I just walked to the park and there was probably 50 elders there doing Tai Chi in the morning.
Yeah, I think it's different for different people. There's five paths that people turn to the meditative arts for. There is the performance side, the therapeutic side, the medical side, the philosophical side, and also the meditative or spiritual side. And we'll see a lot of our elders coming to the practice for the therapeutic and the medical side. You these days you'll see that there's many professional athletes across many different sports that are turning to the meditative arts because they understand the benefits and how it can help them reach that flow state you were referring to earlier. And by having a systemized approach to these meditative practices can help us reach those higher level of performance. Then there's the philosophical side of the practice, which has always been somewhat of a passion of mine, in that I like it in that it expands your peripheral vision so you can see things from multiple angles, and it helps you be more strategic. And then there's more of the spiritual path, which is a very profound idea as well. And so, as we start to think about which one of these paths we decide to follow, it can attract a different person, depending on whatever stage they are in life or what they're looking to do. And when we talk about the flow state, or if we talk about these areas of attainment and realization, it all comes from these five basic underlying principles, which I feel like are the core of any meditative practice. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing sitting meditation, standing meditation, a movement practice like Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga. These five principles are the basics of everything that you need to know. And they are regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. And briefly, I'll kind of touch on what I mean by these five areas. The first one, regulating the body, this is the most tangible layer. This is something where we start with in any meditation practice because we can see the change immediately. And, the basic idea is our alignment and our structure of the body and how we're able to control the relaxation and tension in the body, and then have our presence or our embodied awareness. And we do this. An example of this would be, you think about maybe a time when you're sitting down in your couch and your posture's weak and you've been there for a couple hours and you're starting to get a neck ache, and your energy is very settled but not in a good way. This is an example of depletion. And if we do this for long periods of time, we start feeling lethargic, we start feeling weak, we start feeling drained. Then think of another time when maybe you're at a party with a bunch of good friends, or the most important person in your world walks in the door and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these two different energetic states we're in 100% control of all day, every day. And so understanding the structure and alignment, the relaxation and tension, and our presence is extremely important. On a little bit of a deeper level of body regulation is maintaining some sort of muscular structure in the body so our joints are supported and so we can move and be mobile, maintaining some sort of flexibility in the body so our joints can be fluid and smooth, eating somewhat of a healthy diet to keep our energy levels up, and getting an appropriate amount of sleep. Now, we could touch on all of these a little more detailed, but this is the basic idea of the body. Then we have the breath. And in Qigong, they often refer to Qigong as the science of the breath because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies, and we can use these to get different outcomes physically, mentally, and emotionally. When we start understanding how to use the breath, we can use it to regulate our physical, mental, and emotional well being throughout the day. And because there's so many different breathing strategies, we broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. These yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of meditations that bring the energy inward. And this is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety and panic attacks. It's good for boosting your creativity. Then we have the yang side of the breath, which is more aggressive. It's kind of like if you ever had to push your car or you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to exhale and put tension in the breath and maybe even make it audible. And this helps generate that expansive energetic power in the body. And when we start understanding how to use this in our rituals and our active practices throughout the day, we can use it to regulate those emotional swings. You know, everybody goes through the day with emotional ups and downs. Some people are a little bit erratic and they're up and down and all over the place, and others may be a little more balanced. But when you start seeing those levels of excitement, and we use the yin side of the breath to help bring us back down, or we start seeing ourselves get a little bit depleted and we use the yang side to help pick us up, now we can find more balance in our energetic state, which helps conserve that energy to be utilized in other areas that are more valuable to us. Then, thirdly, we have regulating the mind. Regulating the mind is a very deep topic and something that you'll study for your entire path in the meditative arts. And, you know, one of the most common things I've heard people say through the years is, you know, I've tried meditation before, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. And somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be good with meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana where nothing bothers you. And, you know, it couldn't be further from the truth. The idea is that if we sit for 20 minutes or maybe do a movement practice like Tai Chi, and during that 20-minute session, we get distracted 50 times. And every time we get distracted, we recognize the imbalance. We use the movement, our breath, or our posture to come back to center. We just got 50 repetitions of being out of balance and out of focus and finding center. And if you do that every day, every month, every year, you start to develop this power and this ability to find that center amongst almost any chaos that gets thrown your way. There's these two old monks who are walking down this old dirt road after a huge rainstorm. It's muddy everywhere, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress and she's crying. And the older monkey hollers across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So the older monkey rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle and picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Him and the younger monk are walking a few miles down the road, and finally the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk says, "I left that girl back at the puddle. Why are you still carrying her around?" And how many times in life do we need to get 3 miles down the muddy road before we realize we need to let that thing go? And so, learning how to recognize these imbalances in the mind is a very important part of the training, because the sooner we recognize the imbalances, the easier it is to come back to center and be focused. Then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And this is something we could literally talk for hours about, but a basic idea of it is, once you've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we now have the tools to lead the energy inward, to extend it outward, to circulate it in the body to get different outcomes. And then lastly, we have regulating the spirit, which is very profound and something that often meditation teachers will spend their entire life's journey working towards these higher levels of spiritual development. Something that I like to point out here, and since we've already kind of touched on it in our conversation, is that one practical element of regulating the spirit that we all use every day is, you think about a time maybe when you get excited and your energy levels at a peak. Well, a lot of times when we get excited, that also brings tension in the body. And through meditation, it teaches you how to elevate that energy and that excitement, but at the same time, stay rooted and relaxed. And when we can have these elevated states of excitement with relaxation and root, this is where we start entering those flow states. And this is why so many athletes turn to the practice, because they want to learn, how do I perform at my optimal level, but still stay rooted and focused so I can be present in the moment and get more higher level performance out of what I'm doing. And so, with these five regulations, you can see that just with these core fundamental principles, it can affect pretty much every area of your life.
Mm. With those five, just to recap them, we've got body, breath, mind, energy, and spirit. Anybody at any age can benefit from an improvement in those five areas. My children, they have exams. My daughter's in high school, and sometimes we see the other students panic before the exams. They get themselves into an unhealthy mental and emotional state, and it impacts their performance. So, learning these strategies would definitely benefit children. Also, when we go to our first workplace, we've spent 17 years in school, and now we've got to produce results, and then we've got to socialize and get along with other people, and we've got to, for a lot of people here in this part of the world, there's a what's called a 996 culture. You start at 9 a.m. in the morning, you finish work at 9 a.m. at 9 p.m. at night, and you do that 6 days a week. So you have to be able to take care of all those five parts, especially the body, especially the energy, going from meeting to meeting. Also, for business owners, I work with a lot of business owners, and they sacrifice their physical health for business. And one of the first things you mentioned here was the body, including sleep. I think a lot of people, myself included at 46, there's been a few nights that I've skipped sleep, but for most days, I've got to sleep every night. But it's an ongoing thing. Although it's natural, it doesn't mean that you're good at sleep. About 50% of the world's population are sleep deprived. They get less than 5 hours of sleep per night. For those people who get less than 5 hours of sleep per night, they're 4 to 5 times more likely to pick up a cold and flu. So bringing the body back into balance with these systems is a huge benefit, because if you can sleep better, you can perform better. People like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, one of the KPIs he has for his senior executive staff is to have 8 hours of sleep per night. He wants them to have 8 hours of restorative sleep, because he knows that the next day, these men and women have to make decisions about that company, decisions that are going to impact the business 10 years from today. And to make those decisions requires a lot of energy, both physically and mentally. And if we have a look at energy, a grandmaster chess player sits down, plays chess, limited movements, little hand movements here. But a grandmaster chess player will burn through 6,000 calories per day of energy to make mental decisions. And so even people like Jeff Bezos, they understand the importance of the body in business. And starting with sleep, if my team are well rested, they're going to make really good decisions. And if they make really good decisions, then the success of the company has a greater guarantee of success. So these five principles: body, breath, mind, energy, and spirit are so important. Jeff, can you take us back to breath for a moment? All of us breathe, and most of us are totally unconscious of our breath. We don't consciously think about breathing in, breathing out. It's happening naturally, but because it's happening naturally doesn't mean it's a healthy breath cycle. And the reason why I say that is I was doing a vocal health screening the other day, and I had average levels of oxygen saturation in the body. And one of the things that I realized at that stage was that I hadn't been focusing on my breath. For months, I hadn't done my breathing exercises, but I brought it back into awareness. So, talk us through breath and some of these different strategies, because you mentioned before that they could help regulate mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, there's so many different ones. I'll kind of maybe just pick a few and kind of give you a general overview. But the breath is geared towards the what we call the Kan and Li, or the water and fire, and we use this to adjust different things. Whether if we're feeling excited, we would want to use the yin side of the breath, or um, the Kan side of the breath, to help bring that excitement level down and to find that balance. And a lot of people, when they breathe, like you said, I mean, we all naturally breathe, but we do this unconsciously. And most people, and I don't remember the exact number, but it's pretty high. I think it's like 70% of the population uses less than 40% of their lung capacity. And when you're not utilizing that tissue, those and exercising your lungs, it starts to get brittle and weak. It's like any other muscle in the body. If you don't use it, you start to lose it. And so, exercising the lungs and making them healthy is good for that oxygen carbon and oxide exchange, which helps kind of work almost as a pump, like you're building up that energy. And we have, the two main energy centers in the body. We have below the middle diaphragm, which is located on your lower rib cage. And this is where kind of our bioelectric energy is. And then we have our upper body, which is, the lungs and the heart area. And that's where the breathing takes place. But when we breathe, that diaphragm that separates the lungs and the belly, it works as a pump. And when you inhale and those lungs fill up, it pushes the belly out because that diaphragm is moving downward. And that full, complete breath in doing that cycle helps to massage what in Chinese medicine and in Qigong theory we call our lower dantian, which is basically your guts and intestines. And by massaging that and keeping that healthy and active, now we can store more energy there. So the breath works as an energetic exchange in the body, but also as a regulator to control how we feel physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so it's a very powerful tool. And, an example would be, you think about if you've ever listened to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. And this is very restorative. And this is great and something that we need to do every day. The flip side of that, or more the yang side of the breath, if you ever listen to somebody laughing, they're ha, 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 ha. they're exhaling longer than they inhale. And this is why when you laugh a lot, your belly starts to hurt, you start to sweat, you start to generate heat. Well, these are two kind of extreme examples of that yin and yang side of the breath that we do every day. And as we start to understand the breath and utilize it for these different energetic states as we move through the day through our ritual and active practices, it makes it a very essential tool to help us guide our physical, mental, and emotional well being on the path that we want it to follow.
2016, I went to a training in San Diego, and I was learning how to speak in public. And one of the things that the leader of the training, Brian Tracy, said to me, he said, Daniel, um, you've got the words sorted out for your speech, but your voice, you got to get that sorted out. And I said, what's with the voice? He said, it's really nasally. Like Aussies, they speak through their nose. And he said, if you want to become a professional speaker, you've got to learn to breathe correctly. So he sent me to a voice coach, and I found a voice coach in California by the name of Bob Korf. And the first thing that Bob Korf pointed out was that with my speaking, my breathing was incorrect, and my belly was going in when it should have been popping out. And he could tell that because he could hear me trying to suck in the air, where when you're doing that diaphragmatic breathing, the air just drops in. And once he taught me how to breathe properly, it was within just a couple of sessions that my voice started to change. And what I realized was that I was only using this upper capacity of my lungs. So there was a lot of tension here, and I couldn't get that depth and resonance in the breath. And I was also short of breath. I could never finish a full sentence. But once I learned to breathe right down there with diaphragmatic breathing, I could get a lot more air in the lungs. The voice started to resonate, and I could finish a full sentence without running out of breath. And I had never thought about the way that the belly moved, because here in Taiwan, we tend to have soft bellies. They're not hard, they're soft. So it pops out when we breathe. And you can see that in babies. So Bob Korf said, watch your babies breathe. He said, and learn to breathe like them. And so I watched my babies, and he was right. How they breathed was very different. And so I had come to learn the importance of breath work through speaking. And I know that if I'm going to do a speaking event and I'm not breathing correctly, it comes out in my voice. The voice becomes nasally and it starts to resonate here instead of deep down at the belly. And so that was a big giveaway for me. I also did some breathing exercises this morning. And I noticed that if I do my breathing exercises for, say, 20 minutes before I get out of bed in the morning, my day is totally different. By the time I get up to take care of the kids, my emotions are stable. By the time that they start to argue on the walk to school, I'm emotionally balanced. And by the time I come back and start my day at 7:30 or 8 o'clock for work, my mind is sharp already. But if I skip that breathing and those exercises, I often feel foggy for a long time. But it wasn't until I noticed my oxygen deficiencies were not that good the other day. So it was a good reminder to hear that. How what what is a good style of breath? For somebody to start their day, what type of breath work is ideal at the start?
I have a whole series of a sequence of different breathing strategies that I teach people depending on where they're at in the practice and what they're looking to accomplish with the training. Since most people are already used to chest breathing, I usually start by just bringing their awareness to the chest breathing, but making them start to be aware of how much air they're taking in. And when you do a full breath, you don't want to do like you're taking in 100% of your lung capacity, because if you do this, you'll start to get tight and it'll just be overworking it. You would a natural good full breath should be about 80% of your lung capacity. And if you can do that on a regular basis and start to get to the point where by focusing on that chest breathing, you're consistently hitting that 80% mark. And you say, for example, you said you do 20 minutes of breath work every day. If you did that every day for 3 to 6 months and you were pretty consistent with it, it would start feeding over into the rest of your day, and you'd catch yourself noticing that, hey, I'm doing a full breath later on in the day when I'm at work. And you start to develop that pattern and that habit of doing that on a regular basis. Then once that starts to happen, I recommend bringing it down into the belly breath and really focus on this part of the breath, because now we're doing a different energetic expansion and contraction by utilizing that diaphragm and getting that full breath. And this is the start of some of our meditation practices. Now, sometimes depending on what we want to get with our outcome, there's many different breathing strategies. For example, we'll do a reverse breath, and the reverse breath is very powerful for leading the energy and doing intentful practices. Whereas more of a natural belly breath is something we could do that's just very settling. It's good for stress reduction. So, some of the practices we'll do will be more catered to specific individuals. I always tell people to look at the meditative arts as an evolving life practice. And there's no one combination that fits all people, depending on where you're at and why you're coming to the practice. And that's one of the things that I've always personally been drawn to, is that the meditative arts is an extremely deep topic. I've been studying now for 37 years, and it's not only something I enjoy to do, it's something that's been my profession for over 31 years. I've been running my academy, and I'm still just a student learning all the time. I'm far from being the master. And there's so much involved with this practice that you could study it for the rest of your life and keep seeing new things, and that's what keeps it fun and interesting.
Mm. Always a student. I think it's such a wonderful approach for all of us to take, because the mind remains open. Brian Tracy, he said the same thing to me. I think he had been on stage for 50 years and he said, Daniel, I'm still a student. And as long as you're a student, you can keep learning. For my breathing in the morning, what works really well for me is breathing in to the count of four. And then once I hit four, I take another big breath, fill up the lungs, and I'll hold it for four. So that gives me about 6 breaths per minute. And that works really well for me. I'll tend to do that in the morning. I don't really focus on it too much during the day, but I know if it's been a big day for me, the breath work is also important before I go to bed at night. And I feel that if I do some breath work, even whilst I'm laying down, that sleep latency, that time to get to sleep, significantly shortens. And I've seen some of my clients, just when they've changed their breath and you have a look at the results from their aura ring, their sleep latency can drop from 24 to 17 minutes. So they can get to sleep about 7 minutes faster, which is a significant win. Because for all of us, when we want to get to sleep, there's nothing worse than the mind racing. But if you can put your head on the pillow and shorten that time, it feels a lot better. Also, with the reason why a lot of people are waking up at night time, they wake up because they're anxious. Their their body clock is out of whack, and they wake up between 1 and 3 in the morning because the liver's agitated and they get a lot of anger. So if they learn to breathe even at that time at night, they can get back to sleep and have less sleep disturbances. And that's a win because we need sleep. We need restorative sleep, but we've also got to get out of that sleep debt, which most people are in. And if we can get just the sleep corrected through breath, the physical health improves, the chronic fatigue drops away, the emotional management becomes better, the anxieties drop away, the mood stabilizes, and also the spiritual health. You know, a lot of us, when we come to spiritual health, it's about meaning and purpose in life. And there's two components of spiritual health from my perspective that we've got to work on. And that's number one is courage. We've got to have the courage to act. But we've also got to stop procrastinating because procrastination isn't just putting something off till tomorrow, it's putting our life off. And that weighs heavy on the soul. So if we can get our sleep sorted out, everything else starts to come into alignment. And I think all of us know you have a good night's sleep and things just start to come back into balance. It starts to come back into alignment. You get a month worth of good sleep and you feel like you can take on the world again. That courage increases while simultaneously the procrastination starts to fade away. And the more action we take, the more we're willing to explore risk. Okay, I'm willing to get outside of the comfort zone a little bit more, like getting in the ring. I'm ready to fight up a weight class, which is pretty scary. Now, from my perspective, you look pretty calm. You look like you've got your emotions regulated, and I get this lovely Chuck Norris type feel, but like a 2025 version of Chuck Norris. A lot of perception of a fighter is somebody who's aggressive, they're loudmouth, like Jake Paul type thing. But you're the opposite. In my perception, just from today, you look very calm. And to me, that's more frightening than somebody who mouths off. What are the benefits and changes that you've seen in yourself over the past 36 years? How's it helped you personally?
Well, when you're looking at fighters, a lot of the loudmouth that you see is to sell tickets. I think that some of the most high level competitive fighters that I've met in my career, and I've been doing this for a long time, are some of the most humble, nicest people that you would ever meet. Um, that said, there's always the flashy few out there that are out, barking at the moon, but um, it's it's not uncommon to see somebody who's uh, a little more settled that trains, and I think that in order to deal with a lot of pressure, even if you are one of those ones that runs the mouth, you have to have that level of being able to be settled. Because when you start getting into a stressful environment and you're under pressure, if you can't settle yourself and be focused, then you're not going to be able to hang. And so for myself, through the years, I've seen so many changes, not only in my own personal life, but through my students. It's really kind of been eye opening to me, and some of them have been for myself. You know, I I was, as a young guy, a little bit angry. I had a bit of a rough childhood, and I came up thinking that fighting might be my way out, and I was looking, uh, approaching it from a wrong angle. And I think that's part of why my boxing coach recommended the meditative arts for me. But when I started finding that focus and that ability to be centered, I was able to control my emotions, and that helped affect me not only when I was in the ring and working with somebody, but it helped me in my conversations. It helped me in my relationships. It helped me to uh, deepened my understanding of who I actually was. As a 19-year-old kid, there's not too many 19-year-old kids that really know who they are. And in fact, I'll never forget when I was in my early 20s, I had this old kung fu teacher who said, "You give me 2 months and I'll know you better than you know yourself." And I remember thinking, that fool, he's not going to know me better than what was he talking about. And looking back, he probably did. He probably knew me better than I knew myself, because there's not too many young people at that age that have really had much time to think about life and to think about who they are and where they're at. And the meditative arts helps us slow down and let go of those masks that we're all so apt to be putting on all the time, and really be able to look at ourselves in the mirror more clearly, and to not feel like we're trying to put up this show of who we are, and just stay connected to what's really there. And I think when you can do that, you can accomplish so much more with life.
Mm. That's what the Greeks used to say: man, know thyself. Even Forbes magazine, they talk about it with emotional intelligence. 95% of leaders claim to be emotionally aware, but in reality, only about 10 to 15% actually are. And we have so many blind spots, and a blind spot is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just out of our awareness. And the goal of personal development is to bring those blind spots back into our awareness. And for me, one of my blind spots that worked in my favor for years was when I was an athlete. My level of dominance is very high. I want to win. I want to get a result. I get angry. I get frustrated, but it's actually my fuel. And I'm not getting frustrated at other people. I'm frustrated within myself because it's a feeling of discontent. I want to be somewhere, but I can't get there as fast as I want to get there. But what happens with emotions is emotions are also contagious. So if you can't regulate that, other people pick up on it, and they start to feel that discontent or that aggression is projected at them when it's not. It's my emotion. And so that would get in my way. And people would say, "Oh, you're too competitive. You take it too serious." I'm like, yeah, yeah, I want to win. But when I met a guide, when I met a mentor, when I was, I think, how old was I? I was maybe 36. She sat down and took me through my personality and helped me understand my strengths and limitations, but also how other people perceived me when I was under moderate stress, tension, and fatigue. And it was quite eye opening, because what I was internalizing under stress, I was actually externalizing, but I didn't realize it. And so once I brought that back into my conscious awareness, it was back under conscious control. It took effort, it took time, but I could see the patterns and I could see how other people felt. So learning to regulate the emotion and the mood was really beneficial in business. It was a pattern that helped me win when I was young. When I started to work in corporate, it worked against me, because instead of being um, collaborative, I was more combative. And I had to learn how to collaborate with a team. And then in business, it was also an attribute that other people desired, but I had to be mindful of how it was projected. And so those blind spots for all of us, we all have them. But if we can get them back into conscious control, we can use that energy to move forward. And that's powerful for ourselves. And all of us have it. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be mental, it could be spiritual. But we need somebody to point it out, because the mirror does lie. When I look in the mirror, it tells me the truth, but it's my perception. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and it was a group of men talking about them eating, then standing in front of the mirror. Face forward to the mirror tells one story, sideways, they all looked pregnant. So, Jeff, where to from here? You've you've had more than 26,000 students working with you over the past 36 years. What's next for you in this field?
Well, right now I'm finishing up my next book. It's called The Yielding Athlete, and it's going to be focused on athletic performance and how to use the meditative arts in that area. This last year, I started working with other martial arts academies and yoga studios and helping them to create a program within their academy to have a meditative arts program because most, you know, most martial arts academies, they're busy from 4 to 9, but their daytime hours are pretty vacant. So, with the meditative arts and targeting that elder demographic, which is 50s, 60s, and 70-year-olds, they like coming in during the day. And so, this is a way where we can build out a solid pillar in these businesses and show them how to make a substantial amount of revenue off an area that they're not doing. And what I found is that, for myself, teaching this demographic is graphic is extremely rewarding in that they don't have a lot going on oftentimes at this stage in life. They're semi-retired or retired and they don't have as many activities. They don't have their kids they're toting around. And you'll find students that are very committed. They like the idea of being able to stay healthy longer so they can watch their grandkids grow up. And they're fun to be around. On my last Friday in my class that I had at noon, middle of the day, I had 44 people in the class. And it's almost like, you're at a big tea party because everybody's stoked to be there. They're doing something positive for themselves. And they're making major life changes. Some of them are using it to take the stress levels out of their life. Others are doing it to help their mobility and their overall health and wellness. And it's just putting a lot of good positive vibes into the community. And so I'm showing other academies how to do this, which has been very rewarding because now not only am I spreading the word about the meditative arts, but I'm also showing them how to be more successful in their business and build an additional pillar there. So those are kind of my two main focuses this year.
My first boss told me three things. He said, Daniel, there's three life stages: learning, earning, and yearning years. And he said, you're now in your earning years. And that's when I went and worked with him in real estate. And he said, after that, you'll be in your yearning years. And so for those people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they got so much time. It's like my mum. She's now in her yearning years and she's learning Mahjong and she loves it. She goes to the Mahjong club and plays Mahjong. She loves it. And she's a very committed student because there's no other distractions. I've got the time, I've got the money sorted out. Now I can focus on learning and being committed to something without distraction. And for business owners, I think all business owners globally, if you pay rent, if you pay a mortgage on your property, you've also got to figure out a way to get an ROI on that 24 hours a day, not just from 4 till 9. You've got to figure out how do you optimize the return on investment 24 hours a day. And adding a new pillar into your business can significantly change your future. I remember many years ago, our family, we had a pawnbroking business and we had it for 17 years. And we would open up from Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. We knew in our business that trading on Saturday and Sunday was high risk because if we traded half a day on Saturday, good chances were the customers didn't come in till midday and we wanted to go home by 1 o'clock. So for the first 3 hours, we're just standing around. You might earn for an hour. So we started to think of different ways to generate income. And one of them, we offered a new financial service in the business. And what happened was this new financial service helped us get into retirement faster because we were still open from 9 till 5, but we had another pillar generating revenue. So if people weren't doing traditional loans with pawnbroking or if they weren't buying secondhand goods, they could get payday in cash advances. And just that one new idea in the business changed the direction. And once the direction changed, it gave us greater cash flow to explore other regions. So I recommend for all business people, if you can generate income from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., it's a lot better than doing it from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. Much better. Jeff, where can our listeners learn more about the work that you're doing?
So you can go to my website. It's called theyieldingwarrior.com. If you're interested in my most recent book, The Yielding Warrior, if you go to theyieldingwarrior.com/book and just pay for shipping, we'll send you out a free copy of that. And if you're interested to learn about how to create an evolving life practice with the meditative arts, you can go to the website and we have a 2-week trial where you can check out what some of these teachings are like and kind of see what we're doing if that's something you're interested in.
We'll put the link in the show notes. Jeff, thanks for your time. Thank you
Hey,
so
thanks
much.
for having